Alrighty, guys, how's it going? Hank here, right back at you with another video on the Review and Preview Sports channel on YouTube. And today we are going to be talking about the New York Rangers, and they are in first place in the Metropolitan Division with 48 points. They're actually tied with the Washington Capitals, but by virtue of the tiebreaker, the Rangers are ahead of them because they have more wins right now as we speak. But before we get into that, I'd like to give you guys a friendly neighborhood reminder. Please don't forget to follow us on all of our forms of social medias. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Review and Preview Sports. And, of course, please do not forget to hit that big red subscribe button down below if you like what you saw and you want to see more videos like this. Now, over the past week and a half, as we all know, the NHL had a short pause because there was a major outbreak of the COVID-19 variant of Omicron. They came back on December 28th. The Rangers played their first game the next day. They had a tough loss to the Florida Panthers. They were up 2-1 after two periods, gave up 3 third-period goals, but then they bounced back in a major way. And this is when you heard a lot of the critics saying, oh, the Rangers can't really beat a lot of the good teams. They go into Tampa. They face the two-time defending champion Tampa Bay Lightning, and the first game was a nice little back-and-forth battle. The Rangers ended up winning that one, very dramatic fashion in a shootout. And then 2 days later, they go back to the Garden. Mika Zibanejad gets a hat trick, and Igor Shasturkin gets his second shutout of the season, technically third if you want to count the game against San Jose. And then last night against the Edmonton Oilers, they were absolutely dominant. Alexander Georgiev started this game. He was near perfect. Rangers ended up winning 4-1. Ryan Strome had 3 points in this game. And yeah, as I said, they are now atop the Metropolitan Division with 48 points. And as of right now, only the Tampa Bay Lightning are ahead of them in the conference as they have 49 points. And, you know, looking back to the beginning of the season, there were people who didn't really think the Rangers would be this good going in. I was one of those that could have told you that the Rangers were going to be in the playoffs. Now, granted, at the end of last year, with the turn of events that happened after that game against the Washington Capitals and the loss of the firing of John Davidson, John Davidson, Jeff Gorton, and then David Quinn, I was one of those people that were apprehensive that the Rangers were headed in the wrong direction and that, you know, James Dolan was being meddlesome, sticking his hands in the cookie jar. As it turned out, the exact opposite has happened. Since Chris Drury has taken over as the Rangers GM, they have become a much better team over the course of the offseason. And right now, looking at the Rangers, they're an absolute juggernaut. And one of the big reasons the Rangers are where they are right now, there isn't really one true MVP that you can obviously pinpoint as being the main reason as to why they've been winning all these games. In fact, if you wanted to even make such an argument, there are at least 3 or 4 players you can use for said argument. And, you know, before I get into everything else, let's talk about some of these players. Igor Shasturkin is now among the NHL league leaders in save percentages. His numbers are at 9.3 or 0.936, which is pretty much, I believe it's top 2 or top 3 right now. And he's 5th in wins. Now, keep in mind, Igor missed a good fraction of December because of a freak injury that he had against the San Jose Sharks, and he had to leave that game early despite having shot. The Rangers ended up winning that game 1-0 with Ryan Strome scoring the only goal. But in any event, when he has been playing in goal, he has been absolutely lights out. And if you look at some of the games that the Rangers won, there have been games where any other year, they probably would have had no business winning those games because there would be times, especially the Florida Panthers game back in November. That was a game where I actually met up with fellow Ranger fan Brian Attard and friend of the podcast. Shout out, Brian, if you're watching this. the Rangers were badly outshot in this game, and they ended up winning by a score of 4-3. And a big reason for that was Igor made some clutch saves down the stretch, and it was definitely enough to help them win. And it, as I said, this was definitely not the only time that's happened. And quite frankly, without Igor Shasturkin, who knows where the Rangers would be. However, with that being said, he is also very lucky to have the capable backup of Alexander Georgiev, who, in the beginning of the season, he had a very rough start. Now, granted, obviously, part of that had to have been due to the fact that, he wasn't getting as much playing time with Igor being in the net. But, oddly enough, once Igor got injured, that opened the door for Georgiev to get more playing time. That was when he started to win. He had big wins against the Chicago Blackhawks. And then, as I mentioned, that the near shutout against the Edmonton Oilers, and the one goal he gave up, that was off tipping. So you can't even hold that against him. And looking at some of the stuff he's done in previous years, I never really felt a concern once Alexander Georgiev had to play games, because if you think about goalies, they are creatures of habit. Once you get them in a groove, that's when they start to get hot and they get better. So it's great that the Rangers have a nice young backup goaltender to have along with Igor if for some reason they have to bench him. And it's a good problem for them to have. The only downside, obviously, for Georgiev is we know that his days as a New York Ranger are numbered, and it's likely that he will probably get traded in the offseason, and we'll probably even lose him as a free agent. But in any event, he has definitely been one of the unsung heroes to the Rangers. But again, as I said, Igor has been an important force behind the net. And, if you had to replace this man with somebody, I think Igor was the perfect heir to the throne, as I should say. The next player that obviously needs to be mentioned is Artem Panarin. If you watch him on the ice, he has got an incredibly high IQ of hockey, and he's got great vision with the puck. And the amazing part about these last 2 games, he tested positive for COVID. Now, if any other team loses a star of the caliber of Artem Panarin, that would probably be a devastating blow, especially when you consider the fact that they played against teams that had Steven Stamkos, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Braden Point, to name a few. And the fact that the Rangers won both of those games, that speaks volumes about how much depth they have. And once he gets back into that lineup, you have to figure that the Rangers are going to be in really good shape. And then, of course, we go to Chris Kreider. Now, if you look at Chris Kreider in years past, he has notoriously been a streaky player. Whenever he would score goals, they would obviously come in bunches, but then whenever he would get cold, you never knew when that cold streak would end. But one thing that was never a doubt with Chris Kreider, the guy has always had talent. He's big, he's strong, he can absolutely play the game, and he has definitely become one of the true leaders of the squad. As a matter of fact, he's the longest tenured Ranger. In fact, he's the only Ranger left who was on the deep runs of the 2014-15 squads. He was actually a rookie when they made that conference finals run in 2012. He made his debut in the playoffs, scored a few big goals in those series wins against the Ottawa Senators and the Washington Capitals on their way to a tough conference finals loss to the New Jersey Devils. But he has always had a knack for coming up big in clutch moments. And this year, it's probably been his best season. We're barely in the new year, and he already has 20 goals. And one of the things that's been impressing me a lot this year, he has had a great knack for just getting right in front of the net. He scores a lot of goals on rebounds, and that is someone who is in the right place at the right time, and he is good awareness of where he needs to be. Now, of course, you can't really talk about the great Rangers this year without talking about the other guy that you have to consider for the MVP, and that would be Jericho, New York's own Adam Fox, who signed a 7-year contract that goes to $9.5 million per year early in the season. And, it's very rare that you can lock up a defenseman at the age of 23 who you could even make the case might not even be in his prime yet, which is crazy to think about considering last season, this guy won a Norris Trophy. And if you look at where he is this season, he is definitely among the best defensemen in terms of scoring. He currently leads the league in points. He's in a neck-and-neck battle with Victor Hedman. And if you really look at him from a pure on-ice perspective, he's so far looking probably even better than he did in his Norris Trophy season a year ago. And remember, keep in mind, that Norris Trophy season happened during a year that started late. You only had about 48 games because of the whole COVID-19 scenarios. And obviously, these were all games against division rivals. But in any event, he is another defenseman that has great vision. He has been getting a lot of points, assisting on a ton of goals. I believe he has 30 assists now this year. He is what has been making the Rangers go this year. He is absolutely elite, and you could even make the case that the Rangers underpaid for this guy. That's how good he is, and I am very excited to see this guy play for the Rangers for many more years to come. However, with that having been said, we talked about some of the main reasons for the success in terms of players. We then have to talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, and that's Mika Zibanejad. I mentioned that he had a hat trick against Tampa Bay Lightning, and he is now on a stretch where he has scored 6 goals in his last 6 games, which, granted, that may have been inflated by that hat trick, but it doesn't matter. That's a really good stretch, and he also did a really good job shutting down Connor McDavid in the win against the Edmonton Oilers. So these are the positives regarding Mika. The negatives, for the most part this season, and up until the Arizona game, he struggled mightily. Now, granted, he's been fine in every other area of the game. Penalty killing, he's been great. Defensively, he's not too bad. However, the problem is, at that point, he only had 5 goals in the season. And the scary part about that is, this is a guy who is going to get paid $8.5 million per year for the next 8 years. And if you're going to be committing that to a center, you want more production. You want more production out of him. As much as I love seeing him play well right now and play better, you need your center. You need a lot of production out of your center. So that is definitely a concern for me. But with that having been said, we have also seen moments in years past where Mika has scored goals in, well, not just last year, but if you remember at the end of the 2020 season, right before the pause happened, Mika had a knack for just scoring goals in bunches. The biggest example, obviously, coming in the game against the Washington Capitals, which happens to be probably the most memorable game I ever saw at Madison Square Garden. He scored 5 goals in a 6-5 overtime win. So when you look past the goal scoring problems that he had early in the season, and when you look past the fact that he only had 5 at one point, Mika has a lot of intangibles, and he's someone you obviously want in the locker room. And he's a guy that, up until he signed that contract, there was a lot of talk as to him being the new captain. I certainly would not be opposed to that. But in any event, I'm just hoping to see some more goal scoring out of him over the course of the second half. And, I wouldn't necessarily rule out that possibility. But it does beg the question, though. And Brian, as I mentioned, who I ran into at the game, if you watch some of his episodes of Blue Truth, he mentioned it is his belief that the Rangers missed out on a golden opportunity in getting Jack Eichel. And as you all know, the Vegas Golden Knights pretty much got that guy for what pretty much amounts to a bag of magic beans, essentially. And granted, they still are waiting on him to return from his surgery. But that at the same time, this is a guy who is a superstar caliber center. And if the Rangers don't win a cup, as much as you love having Mika on the team, that could be something that could come back to haunt them, because having an elite center on your team is very important to winning a Stanley Cup. However, that's all. This is all a moot point because, as we know, Vegas ended up winning that sweepstakes. The Rangers, whether they didn't really want to pay enough, whether they didn't want to give up too much minor league assets to get him, or whether they were worried about the surgery, who really knows? All that matters is the team on the ice right now is doing pretty well. So I'm not going to cry over spilled milk, although make no mistake, I would have enjoyed having Jack Eichel. However, with that being said, as much as I love all the intangibles regarding Mika Zibanejad, I definitely want to see more stretches like this of him scoring all these goals. But in any event, let's talk about some of the other key reasons for the Rangers having this good start. So I think the first guy you have to talk about, obviously, is the head coach, Gerard Gallant. And going into this offseason, as soon as the Rangers can, David Quinn, who, make no mistake, had some moments where, he was doing a good job. The 2020 season as a whole, I thought they underachieved, but after a while, I think you could tell over the course of the 2021 season that he really was not the right coach for the team going forward, at least in the long run. He was more of a short-term hire if you read in between the lines. Gerard Gallant was really the only option out there that I figured was perfect. And from the minute they hired him to be the coach, I automatically knew that they were going to get better. And why is that? Well, if you look at his track record, you look at the Florida Panthers, the 2015-16 team as an example. They turned around in his second year with the team. And then, obviously, unfortunately, we know what happened afterwards. They got off to a rough start. He got fired, but he led them to one of their first playoff appearances in quite some time. He put them back on the map, even though he was only there for 2 years. He goes to the Vegas Golden Knights. This is an expansion team, a team that was expected to finish pretty much in last place. He gets the most out of his talent there, and then some, leads them to the Stanley Cup Finals. And going into the Rangers, you look at all the talent that he had, there was no question in my mind that this was the right guy. Everyone loves to play for this. What more can you say? I think one of the best things about him, if you look at his press conferences, you can tell this is a guy who is absolutely serious about winning. And if you looked at that game against the Florida Panthers, he said in particular, he was not satisfied with their performance, despite the fact that they beat a team that at the time was among the league leaders in wins. And if you look at a lot of other press conferences that he has, he'll never go out and act all ecstatic. He'll always talk about areas in which the Rangers need to improve. And I think that's really the true sign of a good coach. And the best part is he's been able to roll out 4 good lines for the Rangers. And this is something that the Rangers haven't had since they made those deep runs in 2014-15. He has the luxury to put out lines with guys, with other key performers such as Barclay Goodrow, Ryan Reeves, Kevin Rooney, to name a few. Every single player on this roster has been contributing in some way or another. And that's probably and the fact that Gallant has been able to get the most out of all these guys on this roster, that tells you one reason as to why they are where they are right now. However, we also need to talk about the guy who built this team, Chris Drury. This offseason, he made moves that at first seemed to be were viewed negatively. He traded Pavel Buchnevich to get Sammy Blais. And while Sammy Blais unfortunately tore his ACL after getting slew-footed by PK Subban in that win against the New Jersey Devils, Sammy Blais was a guy who provided definitely some good depth and was a skilled player who had a lot of grit, and I think was somebody who definitely would have contributed over the course of the season had he been healthy. But then he also got guys like Ryan Reeves, who is a guy that will drop the gloves at any given time and stand up for teammates, and Barclay Goodrow, another player who lately he's been on fire. He actually scored 2 goals in the win against the Tampa Bay Lightning. all of these players, while they obviously have the grit and the intangibles, they also have the experience of making Stanley Cup runs, with Goodrow and Blais being Stanley Cup winners. And as I said, they have both been significant. Reeves and Goodrow in particular have been significant contributors to this Rangers' strong start. However, with regards to Chris Drury, I don't think he's going to be done. I think there's definitely some holes on the roster right now. I mentioned center depth. There's definitely a possibility that maybe he finds a way to add to it. He could very well end up trading Philip Hedl, who's probably been one of the few Rangers players who has been a disappointment. But then there's also the right wing pole. And all things considered, looking at Kaapo Kakko, he's been all right this year. He's had kind of an up and down season, but we've seen flashes of his talent. In the last 4 games, he only had 1 assist, but otherwise, I'm not worried about him despite the bust label he's been getting, which frankly I think is pretty unfair. And, you have Barclay Goodrow, who, as I mentioned, has been on fire. He's had 5 points in the last 3 games, but he's not someone you want to put on your second line on a permanent basis. Julien Gauthier is another solid right winger. He's got a lot of speed, but he doesn't quite have the finishing touch that could make him in a top 6. And while Alexis Lafreniere has been another player that has been gotten a lot of unfair criticism, he's also not somebody that you're going to put on the right side of a wing. So it begs the question, who is he going to get as to fill that hole? Could he get Philip Forsberg? Could he get a Tomas Hertl? Could he get a Philip Kessel? I don't think either of those guys are out of the question. Kessel in particular would make sense because, as I mentioned, like the other guys that he has acquired, Kessel has experience winning Stanley Cups. He won back-to-back with Pittsburgh, and he was a key contributor in those Stanley Cups too. So if he goes to the Rangers, who knows? Maybe that translate. Riley Smith was another name I'd been hearing. However, with that being said, I also don't know if that's a realistic possibility because Vegas is now without Pacioretty. He had a wrist injury, and he is going to be out for a significant amount of time. We don't know if or when he's going to come back this season. But looking at his numbers right now, he's got 11 goals and 26 points over about 30-plus games this season. He's also played with Gerard Gallant with the Las Vegas Golden Knights, and he was a member of that Stanley Cup team too. So I think I think he's another player that they could definitely use in that right wing spot. So who knows? But given the job that Chris Drury's done, I trust that he's going to make the right decision. And I think the best thing about the Rangers winning all those games is they're not in any dire move to fill these holes as we speak. I think over the course of the next month and a half, we'll probably see more games. We'll see more teams. We'll need to be selling more teams. We'll be figuring out if they're buying. The Rangers are one team that we know will definitely be buying. I think it's just a matter of time before he fixes the holes. But as we pretty much learned with the Rangers, though, they've been able to fix holes given the right time. So, and they're really the one team that I trust at the moment to be fixing a lot of these holes. He could also patch things up on defense. However, it is possible that they could have found another guy to help in that department. Zach Jones made his NHL debut this year, although he had a decent performance coming out of training camp at the beginning of the season. I think we knew it was only a matter of time before he eventually got called up to the NHL roster. And if we look at 2 games, now I know this is a small sample size. He's averaged about 14 and a half minutes on ice. He has a +1 with 1 shot, 1 hit, and 2 blocks. Those are pretty good numbers for a defenseman. Granted, he's only for a young defenseman who's only played 2 games. And one thing to consider is he went up against guys such as Steven Stamkos, Braden Point, Connor McDavid, and Leon Draisaitl. And he has also shown that he is very versatile. He can play both sides on defense. So maybe he's a guy that you figure will be contributing down the road. However, at the end of the day, when you look at this team as a whole, in addition to the names I mentioned at the beginning, you have the Panarins, you have the Kreiders, you have the Shasturkins, you have the Adam Foxes. Those four are some of your big names. You have Mika Zibanejad scoring goals whenever he can. This is a hot start that I think can be sustainable. I said before the season, and I'll say it now. This is obviously a better team than we saw last year and the year before that. And now, in addition, you also have good supporting cast members such as Alexei Lafreniere, Ryan Strome, Ryan Reeves. A lot of guys on this team have good intangibles. And when you look at the games they've won, I understand you're not always going to have a pretty win. But more often than not, they've been getting the job done this year. And even during those moments where the Rangers had that label where, they couldn't win against the good teams, it wasn't like you thought the Rangers were out of it. Let me give you two examples. The game against the Nashville Predators, that was a 1-0 game where they got absolutely robbed by Nashville goalie UC Saros. 9 out of every 10 times, if the Rangers give up one goal, they probably win that game. And then you look at the Golden Knights game. They lost that one in a shootout, and granted they blew a lead in the third period, but still, an important thing to keep in mind, that was also a game where you didn't have Igor and you didn't have Panarin in that game because Panarin also missed time with a hamstring injury. So, all things considered, the Rangers have had a little bit of moments where they've had bad luck with regards to injuries. But the fact of the matter is, they are a very deep team. And only time will tell how far they can go in the playoffs. However, with that being said, I think they are absolutely capable of making a deep run because you have a combination of players that are young, you have a combination of players that are skilled, and you have a combination of players who have been along for the ride, made some deep cup runs, have championship rings under their belts. It's literally a combination of everything. Now, I'm not suggesting this is going to be the year the Rangers win the cup, but if you aren't paying attention to how good this Ranger team is, I would suggest starting now, because this is a team that can go as far as they can in the playoffs, and there's not too many teams out there that legitimately scare me going into the playoffs. And this might sound biased coming from me, but that's the honest truth. But in any event, that's all I really have to talk about with regards to the New York Rangers. It has been a lot of fun enjoying this ride. I can't wait to see more, whether it be on my couch in my living room, at Madison Square Garden, or at a bar with friends. This is a fun team, and just watch. We haven't seen the best of them yet. But in any event, I want to thank you guys again for taking this time to watch this video. If you'd like to see more videos like these, please don't forget to hit that big red button down below. Give us a subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments. What do you think about this Ranger team? Do you think that they are a special team? Do you think that they can make a deep run? Do you think they can possibly even win the Stanley Cup? Do you think that Chris Drury will make the necessary moves to fill in their holes and help get them to where they need to go? And do you think that Gerard Gallant is the coach that will definitely is one of the best coaches that we've had in a long time? Let me know. I would love to have a conversation with a lot of you guys in the group chat. And as always, that'll about do it for this short video. Until next time, I'm Hank and Dictor, and I will talk to you guys later.